All right. This is Sandra Lee with miracleinspirations.com and the Breathe Life's Inspirations blog. I have been doing a weekly video blog about your health on stress and what you can do. So if you want to check that out, I'd love to have you listen. I am doing the Facebook Live about genetically modified foods that I have tried to record twice yesterday. That didn't work out because of the audio problems. I think I've got it today. But because I've already done it twice, I've already figured out some things that I didn't know, and I went and I looked them up. So you actually get better information today than you would have if I had done it yesterday. What fun. Okay, so genetically modified foods, or GMOs, are made through processes called genetic engineering, where they take a quality from a plant or a bacteria or even an animal, a quality that they want to convey to a food crop. So I'm going to take for my first example the quality of being able to survive application of Roundup herbicide. So they found a bacteria that wasn't killed by Roundup, and they wanted to give that quality to food crops so that they could apply as much Roundup herbicide as they wanted to those food crops and not kill the plants that they wanted to grow. So we're going to start off looking at corn. Okay, so it's like if you have a corn plant, a normal corn plant, and you apply Roundup herbicide to it, that corn plant is going to die because it's an herbicide, right? That's what it does. Okay, but they want to be able to grow lots and lots of corn, apply lots and lots of Roundup herbicide, and have those plants not die, grow to maturity, and produce corn for humans and for animals to be able to consume. Okay, so they want to be able to give this quality that they call Roundup ready resistance to being killed by Roundup. They want to be able to convey that property from the bacteria and give it to the plants. So how do they do that? They take cells from corn plants and they put them in a petri dish. I mean, it might be more complicated than this, but basically this is what they do. And they isolate the gene, the DNA, that gives this quality of being able to resist being killed by Roundup. They isolate that, they multiply lots and lots of copies of that pieces of DNA, and then they shoot it into a plate full of corn cells in the hope that this shocking process of shooting this stuff at it will actually have some of these corn cells take up the DNA from this bacteria that's Roundup resistant. It's a lot more complicated than that, but basically they just do this crazy process that hope and pray that this little piece of DNA will be incorporated into the genetics of the corn. And it's very imprecise. It's random, essentially. So it's like they don't know how many of these cells actually incorporate the gene. Most of them probably won't. But of the ones that do, they're going to grow them all out, see if they still produce corn plants, and if they still produce corn, and then if it also has the property that they wanted, right? So they test these corn plants, the ones that grow into corn plants, produce corn. They take those seeds, which have incorporated the genetic modification into them. They plant those again, and they spray Roundup on it. And then do they still grow? So that they know that it has successfully incorporated that gene into the genetics of the corn. That's a basic explanation of how they convey this genetics into another plant. There are different ways, there's, chemicals, radiations, different ways that they have of causing genetic mutations to occur, to change the genetics. But this is a basic description of the process that they use in this particular way to be able to convey genetic material. So there are a lot of errors that wind up occurring in this process. It's very random, right? So there can be thousands of errors in the rest of the genetics of the corn through this process that occurs. And they don't necessarily know where those are going to happen. They don't know what's going to happen. You may have errors like switching from an A to a B, which is going to change the proteins. You can take some copies of a gene that's in the natural corn plant and have lots of them, so you make more of a protein. You can have genes and sequences in the natural corn genome that are eliminated entirely. Okay? Imagine that the genome, right, of a corn plant is like a book. Okay? So you can rip whole pages out and throw them away. You can take pages or sentences or words and have many thousands of them. You can take a section of the book and move it over there and then scramble it, right? So it's like all sorts of things happen in this process of genetic modification. And the impacts of that are very unpredictable. They want to say, so it's like by taking this and putting this in there, the only thing that changes is that this plant is now resistant to being killed by Roundup. They say it's the only change that happens. But in this process of scrambling, basically, and multiplying and deleting elements of the genome, you're taking it and you're just mixing it all up. So you don't really know what the final impact is. I think it's kind of miraculous that some of these cells actually produce plants that look like corn plants and produce product that looks like corn, tastes like corn, functions like corn, right? So it's like if you scramble the DNA like that, there's all sorts of things that can happen. Okay, so in early 1990s, FDA was in the process of deciding whether or not to approve the genetic engineering of food crops. And the companies told them what they wanted to do, and the scientists at the FDA said, this is inherently risky. You could potentially cause new diseases. You could potentially cause nutritional deficiencies. You could potentially cause new allergens to come about. So if you want to have these foods be approved for consumption out in the marketplace, you need to study each and every one of these proposed foods, study them, maybe for years, right? But instead, what happened was the head of this division that was making these decisions decided, nope, no studies are necessary. We're going to say that genetically modified crops are substantially equivalent to non-genetically modified crops. That genetically modified corn and non-genetically modified corn are essentially the same thing. There's no significant difference between them. Substantially equivalent. So there's no need to study. There's no need to do these extensive, expensive studies on these foods. Hi. So you can just put them out there and no approval process is needed. Now the truth is they go through, a minor approval process, but they don't have to do studies. They don't do extensive studies. The studies they do, they say they do lots of studies, right? And the studies they do are to show how is the production going to go, right? We want to make it easier for farmers to grow these things. So it's like, how do we use these genetically modified crops to make it easier, production related? How much chemical application is needed on these things? What are the conditions? Those are the studies they do. They say they're very well studied. What they don't do is extensive safety studies. The ones that you and I as consumers care about the most, those are the studies they don't do. Because they're too expensive, right? They say we've done lots of studies, but they leave out the information that the studies they are not doing are the safety studies, the ones that are important to the people. So the FDA just kind of rubber stamps it, said, yep, you can just put these out. And they started putting out genetically modified crops in 1994. So since like 1996, there have been large numbers of genetically modified crops out there being consumed, right? So in terms of quantity, not so much large in terms of numbers, but quantity. So the genetically modified crops are soy, corn, canola, and cotton. Those are all for vegetable oils. Now, you're not going to go buy a bottle of cottonseed oil, but there's a lot of cottonseed oil in processed foods, packaged foods. And then soy, corn, and canola are the vegetable oils that you're going to see in clear plastic bottles on the grocery store shelf. That nice, light, slightly yellow oil that we are told is the best thing for us to consume for our heart health. I talked about fats and oils a couple of days ago, but soy, corn, and canola are all genetically modified and very commonly available in the vegetable oil department of your grocery store. And then you also have sugar beets, summer squash, a small amount of summer squash, Hawaiian papaya, not papaya from other places, but just Hawaii. Unfortunately, alfalfa was approved a number of years ago, and so a lot of livestock are going to be fed genetically modified alfalfa. And then apples and potatoes have been approved. I'm not sure whether or not apples and potatoes are actually for sale, and I believe salmon was also approved. Again, I don't know if that's actually for sale. So those are the genetically modified food crops that are available for farmers and producers to put out and for people to buy. You are going to find a lot of genetically modified soy, corn, and canola, and sugar beets in processed foods. Soy is a very commonly used industrial food ingredient, as is corn. By corn, we're not talking about sweet corn. I don't think sweet corn is genetically modified. There might possibly be contamination from genetically modified industrial corn, but I'm not sure about that. So genetically modified corn is used as a basic ingredient, just like soy, in lots and lots and lots of packaged foods. You will see it in many different types of ingredients, being genetically modified corn. And then canola oil is everywhere in processed foods. So just knowing that if you are buying something that contains soy, corn, and canola, cottonseed, and sugar, to read the labels and be aware. So one of the best ways to avoid getting genetically modified ingredients is organic. Certified organic cannot have ingredients that are known to be genetically modified. I'll talk more about that in a minute. You can also get foods that are non-GMO project certified. So if you see on a packaged food a little logo that has a butterfly and it says non-GMO project verified, those are products that the company paid to have tested to show that they do not contain genetically modified ingredients. So one of the food products that my husband and I consume that I know has this is tortilla chips that are made with corn and also with canola oil. And so they are non-GMO project verified, right? So it's like I know that they don't have GMOs in there and that the company has paid to test that product to confirm that. Okay, so let's talk about contamination, right? So it's like if eating organic or non-GMO project verified are the best ways to avoid GMOs in packaged foods, you have to know that it's not possible to have non-GMO 100% if you are consuming anything that has soy, corn, canola, or probably cottonseed. So it may say that it's organic, but basically there's contamination. There's contamination from like the way it grows in the fields, the genetically modified pollen or some seeds may blow from one field to another field, or it may wash through the water into another field, contaminating a neighboring field that is considered organic. And it's a really big problem, right? So it's like canola, the plants, the seeds can just blow into another field, causing that organic farmer to lose basically the integrity, the organic status of his farm because of the contamination from GMO, right? Or they've had, trucks go by and the seeds blow out of the truck into another field. So that kind of contamination can happen with soy, corn, canola. And then there's another type of contamination. So one corn crop was supposed to be non-GMO, and they wound up finding in it GMO corn that actually made people sick. And it was contamination, right? So it's like if they have a container, a truck, right, that has GMO corn or soy or whatever in it, and then they dump that out, and they don't clean it well enough, right? And then they put organic in there. That organic is then contaminated by the GMO that was in there before, right? Or if they have a silo, a corn silo, right? They got organic in there, but there's residues of GMOs in there, then it can contaminate it. So basically, it's virtually impossible to have 100% guaranteed GMO-free. I suppose another contamination source might be pollination, right? So it's like if GMO corn plants, their pollen blows over to a non-GMO field, that could also contaminate the organic or the non-GMO corn, right? So there's so many different ways that the contamination can occur. So if you are choosing ingredients that say that they are non-GMO and even organic, just know that it's probable that there's going to be some contamination. It's not possible to test every single grain because then there's not going to be any food left, right? So what you go for is the sources that say that they are organic, knowing that there's going to be some contamination. Let's talk about the other forms of food that have the Roundup Ready, the herbicide resistance. Okay, so I talked about corn. Soy is also Roundup Ready. Canola is Roundup Ready. Sugar beets are Roundup Ready. I'm not sure about the crookneck squash, papaya. I know the alfalfa is Roundup Ready. Let's talk about more of the impacts of the presence of those herbicides and how they work. So these herbicides work by chelating minerals. So you have soil, and in the soil you have minerals, and the minerals are what the plant pulls up into the plant to be able to live, right? And so part of how the herbicides kill the plants is by chelating out the minerals so that the minerals aren't available for the plants and the plant dies. Okay? But when you have Roundup Ready plants that aren't killed by the herbicide, right? They spray the herbicide and it chelates the minerals out of the soil, but the plant is still able to survive. So part of what the plant does to survive is it takes this toxic chemical and it isolates it in the seeds. The plant puts the toxins in the part of the plant that we use for food, for livestock animals, and for ourselves. So the chemical is concentrated in the seeds. That's the part that we eat, right? So you take this herbicide-laden seed, okay? It's still got the chemical in there, right? And animals eat it, people eat it. It's still got the herbicide. The herbicide chelates the minerals, grabs the minerals that makes it so they're not available. So it means that whatever minerals might have been in the plant that would provide nutrition for the animals and nutrition for people, the people and the animals aren't going to get those minerals. And then we still have that herbicide in there. So if there's other minerals, other sources of minerals like what we eat in our food, it's going to grab those minerals too and make it so those minerals are unavailable, leading to nutrient deficiencies. So when you consume foods that have these herbicides on them, you're going to be deficient in nutrients. And a common problem that livestock farmers have is because they're feeding them these GMO grains, right? Soy, corn, canola, cottonseed cake, all those things go into livestock feed. So the animals wind up getting sick. They're not healthy, they're not able to reproduce because the animals aren't healthy, they're not getting the nutrients that they need in their diets. A common problem for livestock farmers is if their livestock are not able to reproduce, right? They have a hard time fertilizing them. They lose a lot of their babies, or the babies aren't healthy, right? So it's like when those farmers switch to non-GMO, they switch to organic feed, then all of their natural fertility and their health comes back, right? The behavior problems those animals develop, those things go away and they go back to being normal, healthy animals. So that's an area where they have found impacts of genetically modified food affecting livestock. So thinking about people, how many more people are having problems with fertility now? So much more common than it ever used to be, right? Is it because we're getting all these herbicides in our food? Maybe it's contributing to people losing their fertility. Okay, so there's more that is impacting the health from consuming these herbicides. Part of how Roundup was initially patented as an antibacterial agent. Kills bacteria. Part of how it works is by Roundup shuts down something called there's a mechanism. CYP enzymes. There's a particular mechanism, and I don't remember what it's called. Okay, that they say it's safe for humans to consume because we don't use that mechanism. Our health does not require that mechanism, but bacteria do. Bacteria use that mechanism for their metabolism, for their living. So by using this herbicide that they say does not harm us personally, but it harms our bacteria, science is now showing more and more how important the microbiome is, the balance of the bacteria and viruses and fungi in our bodies. We need to have that variety of microbiome, bacteria, viruses, fungi, right? In certain amounts. We don't want to have too much of this and not enough of that. And there are some that are pathogenic and we don't really want them in there at all, right? But if they are in there, so it's like salmonella, for example, is one that we don't want to have salmonella in us, right? But if we have salmonella in an otherwise healthy microbiome, the rest of the bacteria, the viruses and the fungi, they're supposed to be there. So it's like yeast is a fungus, right? It doesn't overgrow, and the salmonella won't replicate if all of the rest of the microbiome is healthy, right? So it's like the ones that are supposed to be there, the lactobacillus and the bifidus, and so all the many, many numbers of bacteria and fungi that are supposed to be in our systems are all imbalanced, then it keeps anybody who's not supposed to be there under control. Right? So it's like when you have the healthy microbiome, the amount of candida in the system is normal and it doesn't overgrow. But if you kill the beneficial ones, you kill the beneficial bacteria, that's when the yeast proliferate. Or that's when if you get food that has salmonella in it, then you have an explosion of salmonella. Then it makes you sick. So it's like the balance of the microbiome is very important. So, it's the shikimate pathway. That's the mechanism. Okay? Human metabolism doesn't have the shikimate pathway, but bacterial metabolisms do have the shikimate pathway. And Roundup herbicide, glyphosate, turns off the shikimate pathway and makes it so bacteria die because they're not able to function properly. We depend on those bacteria for making vitamins, B vitamins, enzymes, all sorts of benefits that those bacteria provide for us are not able to happen in balance when we consume Roundup herbicide. So when we consume soy, corn, canola, right, that has Roundup herbicide in it, it affects our microbiome, the health of our microbiome. Okay, so the primary mechanism of genetic modification, okay, is this herbicide resistance. But there's another one that I want to talk about, and it's producing Bt toxin, and it's a pesticide. Bt toxin is a pesticide that is used even in organic agriculture. It's approved for organic use because when they spray it on, it's not super toxic in the food, and it's not super toxic in the environment, and it washes off, and over time it's not active anymore. So Bt toxin is considered safe as a pesticide to use for bugs, insects, right? So in an effort supposedly to make it so farmers wouldn't need to spray so much of this Bt toxin, right? They decided they wanted to genetically engineer the plants so that they make their own Bt toxin. So similar to that other process, they identified the section of the DNA that provides this making Bt toxin property. They put it into the corn and they put it into cotton. Corn and cotton are the two primary plants that have this Bt toxin producing ability for the rootworm that affects corn and for the boll weevil that affects cotton. So every cell of the corn or the cotton produces Bt toxin. Every cell, 24/7, makes Bt toxin. So you have massive amounts of this Bt toxin that's made in the plant. And it stays inside the plant. It stays inside the corn kernels. And it stays inside the cottonseed. Okay? So when a bug eats this corn or eats the cotton plant, the Bt toxin, how it works is it breaks holes in their intestine. It breaks holes in their digestive system, stomach or whatever. Breaks holes in their digestive system. And then the bug dies. Okay? We consume these foods that have all this Bt toxin in them. What do you think the effect of that might be on our health or on the health of the animals that we feed these foods? How many people have digestive problems now? Many more than ever used to be before. Is it because we're consuming Bt toxin in our corn? Who knows? Again, they're not testing it, right? So understanding that these foods that have herbicides in them and cutting off our bacteria health and that have Bt toxin in them may be contributing to the whole range of health problems that are massively increasing. I mean, so many more disease states are becoming real problems, epidemic problems. How much of it is because of the presence of the genetically modified foods? We don't know because they're not testing it. But a common place where this is shown to be true is with autistic children, right? It's now believed that GMO foods and the chemicals and stuff that are on them, all that stuff, may be contributing to the prevalence of the autism issue. And if you have a family that really works to be healthy and they have an autistic child, if they take out all of the GMOs, which basically requires going organic, okay, they find that those autistic children, their symptoms dramatically improve. Sometimes the whole autism thing just goes away and they become basically normal. But if they get a small amount of GMOs or non-organic foods in there again, then all the behavior problems will come back. So it's pretty clear, turn off, turn on, with the presence or the absence of these genetically modified crops and the problems that they can cause. The same thing happens with the livestock animals, right? So it's like animals are sick when they're feeding them the conventional GMO feed, put them on organic, and the animals are fine. So understanding that this can be affecting our health in very dramatic ways. So I talked about to avoid GMOs, organic and non-GMO project verified. But there's one more area where this becomes an issue, as when you go to restaurants. How do you know what they're using when they're making your food? If you want to avoid GMOs, avoiding soy and corn, it can be really hard to really avoid canola because lots of restaurants cook with canola oil. And so I have decided to just choose to be okay with that. Like I was talking about when I was talking about the packaged foods, right? Most of the time, avoiding the things that have the bad ingredients. Okay? Same thing with restaurants. I am okay personally with having a small amount of what I know is probably going to be genetically modified, knowing that 99% of the time, 99% of my consumption is GMO free. And that's just a choice that I personally make. There's some people that decide they want to be more strict about it. That's really personal choice. But when you are informed and you know how to protect yourself, then you're in good shape. I think that is it for now. Oh, I did want to say, there are new methods that they are using to try and genetically modify things now because people are objecting to the methods that I told you about before. And so they are trying to find new ways of doing it that are escaping the regulation, escaping notice. And, it's a moving target. I know that there are some that are trying to manipulate RNA instead of DNA because the genetics is the DNA. I don't really know anything about that. My knowledge about this technology is not current. So just knowing that that may happen. And then, have you heard of CRISPR? CRISPR is a way of genetically modifying things that is much more specific. And I don't know how they do CRISPR, but they can go in and do edits in individual locations on the genome. So it doesn't have as much randomness as the shooting into a plate of cells like I was talking about. But again, you are messing with genetic material. You are messing with the blueprint of our bodies, of plants, and scientists don't really understand the function of every bit of that DNA. They just don't know. They're shooting in the dark, right? So it may appear that making a change in the genome in this specific location is going to have a specific result, but they're guessing. They don't really know because they don't understand everything about how the genome functions. They like to say that this section of DNA has one gene in it and it does one thing and one thing only. But the truth is that that section of DNA might make several different proteins under several different circumstances that are controlled by different things. Or they may be overlapping sections of DNA. Or, something turns this on, then turns that off. So it's very, very complicated how our genetic material works. I mean, our bodies are amazing. And so the amount that science actually really understands is very, very little. They're guessing. So even if they can go into the DNA with CRISPR and change one base pair, they don't actually know 100% what the effect is that is going to be. Just reality. So if they decide they want to go in and do that specific changing of genetics for the purposes of genetic engineering, I still don't trust it. If God and nature made it without interference of humans, then I believe in that. Now, let's talk about hybridization. because hybridization is how human beings have been sort of modifying the gene pool for a really, really long time. And that takes taking one plant and another plant and breeding them together just in the natural way. Okay, so it's like plums and peaches are related. They're similar genetics, but a little bit different because they took two plants and they mated them together to produce a hybrid plant. So it's like a nectarine is a plum and a peach together making nectarines. All very closely related. Closely enough related that they can actually crossbreed like that. Right? So it's like if you take a person with Native American heritage and you marry them with someone with Asian heritage, you're going to get someone with a mixture of those genes. You take someone who is, black, and you marry them with someone who is white, and you are going to get a mixture. Okay, so it's like they're all human. And so we can mix our gene pools. So plums and peaches are same family. You can marry them together and produce a nectarine. That is basically hybridizing plants together. Okay, that is something that nature can do all by nature's self. The plants can do that without scientific intervention. You put those two plants in the same place and a mixing like that is going to occur. There might be a little bit more involved, but it's not that much more involved than that. Right? So it's like they can take one type of apple and they take a twig from that apple and they'll attach it to the stem of another apple, another kind of apple. Right? So it's grafting. Right? It's all still apple. Close enough, even though it's a manipulation that's different from setting two plants next to each other. I consider that pretty much normal types of genetic modification, not scientifically manipulated. Right? So, yeah, I will be wary when and if they ever have CRISPR that is being used for science, for making food. Okay, Sandra Lee with miracleinspirations.com, Breathe Life Inspirations blog. I'm going to be on Facebook Live again at 12 o'clock Pacific time, I believe is my timing, to talk about MSG. This GMO one was to make up for yesterday not getting it done. All right, thanks. Bye.